Hey, folks, good evening. I'm Victor Coronado, co host of Sons of Fidel, and my guest tonight is Carlito Rovira, former Young Lord. Carlito, how are we doing tonight?
We're doing good, but I ain't no former. I'm still
There
a
we
young
go.
lord.
All right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, off air a week ago, we spoke briefly, and you said one of the things that bothers you is that, the mischaracterization of the Young Lord's legacy. And so tonight, I wanted to talk about that. And so that way we can, not that you haven't done it before, not that others haven't done it before, but now it's my opportunity, to give you the opportunity to kind of set the record straight. So who were the Young Lords?
Well, to define who were the young lords, there's many ways to approach that question. But in the most simplistic way, these were brothers and sisters from the hood who wanted to change the world, who were impacted by the political turmoil of the 1960s and 70s, who were influenced by the civil rights movement and Black Power struggle. Uh, in particular, the Black Panther Party, because the Black Panther Party recognized that the gangs, the brothers and sisters from the hood, uh, played a decisive role in working class struggles. Okay, there's this mystification of what is working class. Working class has many stratums, and it's not your white boys at the bar drinking beer with baseball caps anymore. The working class happens to be very, very inclusive of a broad spectrum of the world's population. And now it's being redefined. Being women, women of men of and women of color, including people of the LGBTQ community. What is working class started developing a new definition during the 1960s and 70s, and that process started developing when people of color started attributing their oppression to capitalism. And if there's a way to politically define the perspective of the Rainbow Coalition, which was the Black Panther Party, the Ewart Coon, the Brown Berets, the Young Patriots, and the Young Lords, if there's a way to place their political perspective in a nutshell, is that they were people of color who attributed their oppression, their national oppression, racist oppression, to capitalism. And they saw that their national liberation was part and parcel to the struggle against capitalism and establishment of socialism. I always welcome everyone to study and read the 13-point program of the Young Lords. And the reason why I give that a lot of importance is because a lot of the fallacies of who the Young Lords were is broken when you look at the 13-point program. I always say the best way to describe who the Young Lords were, it was a communist youth organization. How else can you describe them when they are openly calling for socialism, when they are openly calling for the demise of the capitalist system in black and white in the 13-point program, where they are explicit about being internationalist? Okay, those who have distorted the history of the Young Lords will make you think that the Young Lords were the predecessors of the NGOs of today. Okay, that the Young Lords, the heirs of the Young Lords, are Latino politicians. Okay. Uh, they will give you all kinds of description of the Young Lords, Good Samaritan, community activists, but they will never say that they were revolutionaries. And it's reason enough for anyone who is part of that movement and is still politically active to be quite irked by it. So go ahead.
Who was Chacha Jimenez? And can you talk about how the Young Lords started? How was it formed? When was it formed? The date and the especially we're specifically talking about the New York chapter. So why you chose the date of when you announced when your formation?
Well, those are two questions you asked me.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, Chacha Jimenez was the leader of a gang in Chicago, and during the 1950s, the Young Lords go back to the 1950s. They were gang banging all over Chicago. Chicago is more like the world capital of gangs. Okay, and Fred Hampton paid a lot of importance. Chairman Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party paid a lot of importance to the street organizations. Okay, and he was most successful with the Puerto Rican clique known as the Young Lords. By 1968, the work of the Black Panther Party was proven. The success of the Black Panther Party's work was proven with the transition of the Young Lords Party, Young Lords organization, or rather the Young Lords becoming an organization. When they added that O, they added politics. Now, how did the Young Lords in New York begin? And why did we choose July 26, 1969 as the debut of the organization in New York? Well, for starters, we supported the Cuban Revolution. Some of the members, the initial members of the Young Lords, went to Cuba before the Young Lords. And so the political premise of the Young Lords, besides supporting the Black Panther Party, was also supporting the Cuban Revolution. And so on the evening of July 25th, 1969, a formation of Young Lords took the stage in Tompkins Square Park in New York City, and we announced that the Young Lords were in New York now. And that
How old are you? How old were you when you joined the Young Lords?
I was 14 years old. Let me repeat that. A lot of people don't believe it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was 14 years old. The average age of the Young Lords was 17. And if you happen to be 21, we looked at you like you were an old person. We were kids, and it's a phenomenon that occurs in moments of upsurge. When there's an intensity of struggle in the air, you tend to grow up fast. And that's not unusual. The Vietnamese fighters during the war in Vietnam were mostly people of our age. They were teenagers and young adults, and there were women. Okay. In many struggles, in many revolutions, in the Cuban Revolution, it was the youth who carried out that revolution. So what we went through, what we experienced, it was the infantilism of youth was channeled into an energy for struggle, an energy for revolution.
What was the garbage offensive, and why did you choose that as your first tactic?
Well, when the Young Lords immediately upon the the creation of the branch in New York City. The Young Lord started going to the community and actually surveying the community people and asking them what was it that they needed. And the thing that we heard the most was the garbage. The garbage needs to be cleaned up. And it was because the sanitation department in those years had a racist policy of picking up garbage maybe once a week and sometimes even once every 2 weeks. So there was a stench and there was a health crisis as a result of the garbage. And so we started cleaning up the streets, and we had to put the garbage somewhere. Weaponize the garbage in order to make noise, in order to be heard, that this issue, this racist policy of picking up garbage inadequately had to stop. And so we started using the garbage to blockade the main arteries that control traffic in New York City, like the avenues, Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, Park Avenue, Lexington Avenue. We started using the garbage to block the traffic. And once we did that, we lit it up on fire.
I want to draw a parallel very quickly, but then I want to come right back to the Young Lords. I spent time as an activist and an organizer in the Dominican Republic. I spent, I believe, 7 or 8 months out there in 2006. And I was in the city of Navarrete in the Dominican Republic. And for folks who don't know of the history of Navarrete, it's a city that has lost many revolutionary valiant fighters. And it's a city that's produced many revolutionary valiant fighters, and Navarrete strategically is placed on the island. And so what often happens is when you have strikes, everything kind of starts in Navarrete. And what happens is they do the same thing. They take car tires, put some branches, leaves, whatever, any debris you can use. So I was trained to do all this stuff out there. We were, a couple of times we hit the streets, you would light the shit up on fire. And when the city of Navarrete, once you have ese bloqueo right there, it literally, the whole country stops because you can't get trucks from one side of the country to the other. So I'm only digressing just for this one point, just to illustrate the fact that in the city of Navarrete in the Dominican Republic, a very similar, almost identical tactic is used to protest. And so, but moving along. So you had the garbage offensive. Talk about the First People's Church. The First Spanish Methodist Church of East Harlem. Reverend Humberto Carranza, the friendly Reverend. Of course, I'm teasing, but can you talk about what happened there and what in terms of what the Young Lords were proposing and the response, and then kind of I wanted you to tell the story.
Well, Carranza was a gusano. Okay, he was a gusano. I'm not gonna like beat around the bush about that. He was a scoundrel and a gusano. He has sized us up. He knew that we supported the Cuban Revolution. And so when we asked the church, when we asked him if we can use the church facilities to feed the hungry children in the neighborhood, he outright said no. And we were baffled by that because all of this, Christian brotherly love overtures that they come out with, and here you are not giving a damn about the hungry, children in the neighborhood. Because it was known from various sources that children went to school in the morning hungry. Okay, that was commonly known. Even the mainstream media, there's stories on it. And so on December 9th, they had this special mass where you went to, you raised your hand and you got up and you said things that needed to be fixed in the church. Well, we decided to go to church that day. And when Felipe Luciano, our chairman, our New York chairman, decided to say something, the Reverend started talking over him, and then he called in the police. It is commonly known that Reverend Carranza called the police. You know, many people, many young lords were beaten up. I was one of the people who was beaten. It's a very memorable ass kicking I received. It's the first of its kind. And I was, you know, 13 young lords were arrested. What that did, it upped the ante. Okay, it upped the ante because when people found out why the young lords were beaten and what was it that we were asking for, we even had some of the cops that were arresting us say that's not a bad thing that you guys are doing. Okay. 2 weeks later, after we did a sufficient propaganda work in the community, 13 young lords were arrested, and you know, and we did our dandiest to vilify this Gusano Reverend. We went to that Sunday church service and we took over the church. We barricaded the church and we opened up a side door to let the congregation out because we didn't want to get charged with kidnapping. You know, we didn't want it to be more than something else other than what we were trying to do.
And many stood, right? Many stood?
Many of the congregation?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I'm missing. Okay.
Yeah, no, the congregation did not stay. The ones that stood were young lords.
Gotcha. Okay.
And some supporters. There were some supporters who seized the building with us. You know, so you know that takeover, a lot was exposed because immediately, once we took over the church, we did not stay idle. We immediately, you know, went about to implement the programs that we set out to do. Not just feeding children, not only setting up free breakfast programs in the early morning. We started a legal clinic with lawyers that volunteered their services. We started a clothing drive, and we started cultural programs. You know, there were many artists who came to perform. And we had people from the community coming in and just learning about the young lords. We used it as an opportunity to recruit and inflate our numbers.
So I just want to go over some of the programs, and again, correct me if I get any of this wrong. Breakfast programs, clothing drives, free healthcare clinic, daycare center, a legal clinic. So those are some of the things that you folks were doing at the church. Is that correct?
Correct. And I like to add, in order to allow people to understand why we were doing that, we would have discussions on socialism.
And just to provide some context, because I'm not sure if we mentioned this. Essentially, that was the demand, right? The church was being idle for 6 days a week, and it was only really used 1 day a week. And the young lords came and said, "Hey, can we allow for some space here for us to do some work?" Is that how the story went?
It was worse than that.
Oh,
it wasn't
look at that.
used for a day and during the week. It was used maybe for a couple of hours during the week.
Right.
Okay. And as soon as they did their holy moly, they got into their cars and left, went off to New Jersey, where many of those people lived at.
Unbelievable. Can you talk about now let's talk about the hijack of the mobile X-ray truck used to test tuberculosis. Tell that story.
The truck that we liberated. We liberated that. That wasn't hijacked. That was liberated. Okay, it was our taxpayer money that paid for it, and it was sitting idle. Many of these trucks, they were sitting in a garage idle. Okay, and were not being used. However, tuberculosis was rampant in East Harlem, and these trucks had X-ray machines. They had equipment, to detect the disease. Okay, and you're going to leave those trucks idle in a garage, so we hot wired one of them. Okay, and we took it.
And
and,
what was the
and
reception when it came into the hood? What was the reception like?
people like thought we were crazy. Okay, because here we are, stealing a vehicle, and we like acting like a bunch of bad MFs, it's and we were determined to defend what we were doing. Okay, we were determined. They were not going to take that back that easily. There was going to be a battle, because, and it's part of the reason why we succeeded. It opened up a can of worms that was not favorable for the Health and Hospitals Corporation, for the city. Politically, we got them in a bind, because here it is commonly known that tuberculosis was rampant in the Black and brown community of the city. Okay, and here, young lords have to snatch our truck with the equipment to detect how embedded the problem was in the community. Okay, the hypocrisy behind having sophisticated equipment and not using it was too politically embarrassing for the rulers. And so what the health corporation did was they made a deal with us. They provided the technicians for us to be able to service these trucks. This truck, it was one that we stole,
Right.
that we liberated.
Right.
Okay. The city decided to provide us with the technicians, with the know-how of the X-ray equipment that was in it. And it was a concession that came not from the goodness of their miserable hearts. It was a concession that came about from a position of weakness that they were in politically. It was too politically embarrassing. And we caught them with their hands in the cookie jar. They had the equipment, they weren't using it, and yet there was a dire need for the community to be tested.
Absolutely. How about talk about then also Lincoln Hospital, which was later renamed the People's Hospital, and what happened there? We talked offline how patient advocacy didn't really, that kind of idea didn't really exist. It was kind of more of like, well, you're the patient, I'm the doctor, I'm here to basically do you a service, and you're just here to just listen to me and do whatever I tell you to do, right? So can you talk about what happened there, that conflict, and then to his credit, and I want to make sure I got the story correct, but Dr. Antero Laco, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he became the new director, and my understanding is that he was willing to work with you folks. Can you tell that story?
Well, many people were willing to work with us. What's questionable is the motives.
Right.
Okay. Many people were, as what happened with the tuberculosis truck. Many people, the young lords, smashed a lot of fallacies. Okay. Lincoln Hospital was a hospital that was condemned. Okay. It was condemned for rich people, but it was not condemned for poor people. And just to give you a sense of how old that the hospital was, it was where a lot of escaped slaves were brought to during the 1800s. Escaped slaves. That was one of the stops of the Underground Railroad, and they were examined before they went on in their journey. there were many doctors. There were many doctors who supported us. And it's the reason why, once we took over the hospital was functioning. You would never know the Young Lords had taken it over. Okay. Unless you were NYPD and you tried to come in, you were not allowed to come in if you were a cop. Okay. But the hospital was open. There were doctors who supported the Young Lords because they saw what we were doing. To give a better analogy of what motivated us, and what was it that we did. The Young Lords paid a lot of attention to healthcare. That was one of our pillars, and understandably so. Most of the disease that occur in the hood, in communities of color, are diseases of oppression, like tuberculosis. Okay, today is COVID-19. Okay, there's a reason why today COVID-19 is Black and brown communities are the most susceptible areas where people become infected with COVID. Okay, there's a reason for it, and it's not that the atoms of the virus are attracted to us. It's because there's a precondition, and that precondition for diseases is oppression. It's poverty. Okay, and that was understood. The Young Lords, a lot of these doctors, they ran that thing that you just described, the social arrogance, but that only lasted until the Young Lords came into being. Because we used to, the same way we used to patrol the community, the streets, we also patrol the floors in the hospitals. And whenever we saw an injustice, whenever we saw doctors being arrogant with our people, we intervened. Okay, we brought the gangster into politics wherever we were, wherever we organized, and we were not alone. We used to work with this organization called the Health Revolutionary Unity Movement, which was healthcare workers, which included doctors. Okay, and when we took over Lincoln Hospital, they were part of the show. Atron was part of the show. Wherever we were, our perspective was winning. Our call for a socialist society, being the solution to all of the problems of healthcare. The arguments were very winning. Okay, and so people gravitated not necessarily to us, but to the idea. Okay, and because that's important. Organizations come and go, but ideas, the ideas of justice, the ideas of humanity, that stays. Okay, and develops. It has a life of its own. And that is how the Young Lords came into being. That is how we evolved our perspective. Okay, because there's a lot of things today in policies, in medical policies. I'm proud to say that, it's attributed to the work we did. Acupuncture was illegal. Okay, it was illegal during those days, and we practiced acupuncture despite its illegality. We used to go to Chinatown to get those needles. We used to go to Canada to get those needles, and thanks to the work that we did with Brother Matulu Shakua, a Black nationalist doctor at Lincoln Hospital. Young Lords were partook in the healing, using acupuncture for healing drug addiction.
Is that the stepdad of Tupac Shakur?
Yes, they're related. They're related. Don't ask me how.
Okay. No, está bien. Yeah, yeah.
But they are related. You know, because yeah, Tupac had a connection with the Black Panther Party. Assata Shakur was his aunt,
Right.
and Tupac Shakur's mother was also in the Black Panther Party.
Afeni. Right.
Yes.
In the acupuncture program, you had a detox program, right, that helped people kick certain drug habits. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, well, that was part of the whole struggle in Lincoln Hospital. One of the demands in Lincoln, you know, when we were organizing around Lincoln Hospital, the creation of a detox program was one of the demands. You know, but what differed, you know, our perspective differed from others because we were opposed to methadone. Okay, methadone is nothing but another form of heroin, and we had our faith in acupuncture. And
I want to acknowledge a comment that someone just wrote saying, "Imagine if American gangs had a strict Marxist-Leninist foundation. They already have the numbers. The strategic implications of that would be nothing short of a political earthquake." Did the Young Lords organization? Did you folks have guns? And if you did, why?
We were an armed organization. We only used weapons once, and that was when we took over the church the second time. Julio Roldan, one of our members, was found mysteriously dead in his jail cell at the Tombs in Lower Manhattan. And so, in order to you know, project our views of our right to armed self-defense, which, by the way, was one of the points in our 13-point program, that we believe in armed self-defense and armed struggles as the only means to liberation. To demonstrate that in the actual process, in the actual practice, we took over the First Spanish Methodist Church, the People's Church, with shotguns and carbines.
What was the membership process like? Can anybody just join willy-nilly? Or what was your process like?
We understood that revolutionary organizations are despised by the powers that be. You know, we saw how even the civil rights movement was infiltrated by the police. We saw Malcolm X, the circles of Malcolm X, you know, infiltrated by the police. We saw how the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party in Puerto Rico was infiltrated by the colonial police. You know, so we understood that you know, we you know, have to you know, guard against that, but it doesn't mean that we have to be paranoid. What it means is that we have to professionalize our existence, you know, and that's something that the Young Lords were attempted to do, and that was to create an entity of professional revolutionaries, because the rulers, they can have sophisticated organization. They have the FBI, they have the CIA, they have DEA, they have, you know, intelligence of the you know, Internal Revenue Service and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, police intelligence, but they're not invincible. We, meaning the people, the oppressed and exploited in this country, can develop better, sophisticated methods organizationally and politically than they possess. Okay, you know, that is a rule of revolutionaries, to develop greater sophistication than that of the enemy, of our oppressors. You know, it is the reason why Cuba, for example, Cuba today has not been, you know, undermined by the U.S. no matter how many attempts. And why? Because their professionalism, okay, has you know, brought them steps closer to invincibility, you know, in protecting their revolution. Well, we could do the same thing. We made mistakes. That's right. You're hearing it from a young lord. Young lords, Black Panther Party, we made mistakes. And when you make mistakes in politics, your foes will take advantage of them, you know. And it's something that, you know, we need to learn from the mistakes of the past, so that, you know, the future people's movement will be better. Okay. And that's why that's what I tell you know, wannabes today. You know, wannabes and people who distort our history. uh it's really not about bringing back what was. It's about learning from the past so that we can build something better for the future.
The Young Lords had mandatory political education classes. You had the Palante newspaper that you would sell, and then I believe point number one of your rules of discipline was that you were expected to be a young lord 25 hours a day, which is an exaggerated, but it drives home the point of that you were to be a militant of the party, of the organization, you know, full time. Can you talk about um, all of those things, like how those things are connected and why you did those things?
Well, it is part and parcel of what we just discussed about learning, okay, and professionalism. You cannot develop professionalism unless you have rules that guard you from the negative influences of capitalist culture. Okay, I mean, we have rules that you know, that addressed the question of getting drunk, getting high, drugs, taking liberties with women, you know, respect for women, uh, rules of mandatory study. Yes. And it's because, as Che Guevara said, you know, a revolutionary has to begin by, you know, waging the revolution within oneself, because you cannot you cannot talk about changing the external world unless you know, you also work to change the internal, your internal being. Uh, um, you know, and I'll give you an example. You know, the Cuban Revolution, they admit the mistakes they made. They were they were perhaps the most homophobic, you know, revolutionaries in Latin America at one time. And today, you know, because of that you know, that struggle to revolutionize our, you know, the world outlook. You know, today, you know, homophobia, you know, women's oppression, it's illegal by decree. Okay, it's illegal by decree, and people in Cuba are educated on those cultural questions. You know, and what what the Young Lords mandatory education meant was that we were going to become experts in world history. We were going to become experts in the evolution of women's oppression. We were going to become experts in not only Puerto Rican history, but American US history, Black history. Um, you know, and when you learn, the aim was to also change ourselves, change our you know, dynamics, change our you know, relationships with our, you know, men and women, you know, with the community. How is it that we, you know, why is it that racism exists in this country? You know, the history of slavery is interlocked with you know, the history of capitalism, and that's what we taught our members. That we train them in Marxist studies, despite what some of the distorters of our history may say. I learned how to read and write in the Young Lords by studying Mao Zedong's Red Book, by studying the Communist Manifesto, by studying Frantz Fanon, the wretched of the earth by studying the speeches of Che Guevara. Okay? In short, by studying revolutionary communist doctrines. Okay? We did not call it that, but that was the only alternative that there was. We were not going to study the New York Times. You know, we were not going to study the Bible. Oh, that's another one. You know, you will hear many people today saying that we were motivated by religious doctrine. No, you know, we were secular. We were not against people who were religious. But we did not adopt religion. We were secular. And we accepted members who believed in various religious faiths. We had Roman Catholics, just like we had people who practice Islam, Muslims. We had members that were Muslim, you know, but it was understood. It was understood that we were secular, so there would not be, you know, conflicts internally. That religion was something that was a personal affair with those that were practicing it, you know. But our you know, line of march was the doctrines of revolution.
My understanding is that a requirement was, you mentioned all those books, Socialism and Man in Cuba was also something that was required reading. You know, I'm putting up this book here, Che Guevara Speaks. You can find that piece in here, among other ones, and this is from a communist publication. So you were 14 years old when you joined the Lords, the Young Lords. Why?
I didn't have a childhood.
So why did you join? Why did you? What was it about the Young Lords? What was going through your mind as a 14-year-old to say, I need to join that? What do you remember?
Well, very well. To be able to explain that, I would have to explain to you the history of the Puerto Rican migration. My family was amongst the earliest migrants in the Lower East Side in the 1950s. And the Lower East Side was predominantly a Jewish community. I mean, some of my neighbors had numbers tattooed on their arms. Okay, they were, you know, survivors of the Holocaust. Unfortunately, between 1948, when the State of Israel was created, and into the 1960s, the Jewish community in the United States, which was an oppressed community, they were victims of discrimination, just like Black and Latinos are. But there was a transition as a result of the creation of the State of Israel, and the Jewish community transcended from being an oppressed community to being a white community and partaking in some of the white privileging racist behavior that other you know, sectors of the white population would exert. And so, you know, there were times when I had, you know, fist fights. It was common for me to have fist fights with the white kids. You know, there were different things, you know, and so by the time I became of age, I mean, by the time I became, you know, 14 years old, you know, the Black Panther Party had, you know, they had operations in the Lower East Side. And I fell under the wing and became my mentor too. I came under the wing of Black Panther Party leader, Bob Collier. Bob Collier was one of the Panther 21, by the way. He bought a building on 9th Street and Avenue B. It was a building that was used by social services to, you know, to provide programs for people. And so the social services sold it to the city, and at the time you can buy a building for $1 so long as you maintain it and build it up. So Bob Collier bought it, and it became a lot of things. It became the headquarters of the Black Panther Party in the Lower East Side. It became a place where people used to get their GED. It became a lot of things, a daycare center, etc. One day, Bob Collier, knew that I was like on the edge of getting in trouble because I was busy sniffing glue, experimenting with different drugs, getting in trouble, being stupid, not knowing how to read and write, not paying attention to my racist teachers,
Right.
when at times that I should have, And so Bob Collier decided that he was going to send me to Denver, Colorado, along with three other, kids in the neighborhood that he was working on. What was happening in Denver, Colorado? It was the first Chicano moratorium. Okay. And I was going with the Puerto Rican delegation to that conference. I met Cesar Chavez. I met Corky Gonzalez. I met the Brown Berets. I met Chacha Jimenez. And it was meeting an entity of Boricuas like myself in military fashion that impressed me. And so when we came back to New York City, it was a no-brainer that that's what I wanted to become, a young lord. On that bus, there were other people like Iris Morales. Okay, I don't know if you know who she is. She was on the leadership of the Young Lords, and she is also the one who created Palante Siempre Palante, the movie. Okay, and she's written a number of books on that history. I met her on the bus, and when I came back to New York, I was a different person. There was an impact that trip had on me, that made me who the person I am today. It was a decisive moment in my life when I came back, when I went there, I should say, because I was not meeting new bloods on the street. I was meeting revolutionaries, and that had tremendous impact on me.
So we're gonna transition to a few other topics. I just want to say from personally, I hope I don't get emotional. I haven't got emotional not once on any of these episodes, but I just have a certain amount of gratitude that I have towards the Young Lords, because at some point I was sort of in the same space where you're sort of lost, and I found out about the Cuban Revolution. I found out about the Young Lords and the Panthers, and if there are four different groups and entities that have had the biggest impact on me, I could say it's the Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and the whole Cuban Revolution, and the Young Lords, the Panthers, and Malcolm X. And so, so yeah, I just
and understandably so.
Yeah. It's it just it woke me up to my own self-worth and realized that we're Latinos, we're something, we're somebody.
That's right.
That we and there is that. And I've realized now that politics is a game of nothing but gangsters. It's what type of gangster you're going to be, and there's a certain attraction to that an appeal to that. Whereas, like we're constantly characterized as either submissive or dumb, or we're criminals, and to see and hear about young lords with your berets in your military gear, with your guns, and not just for the sake of doing something crazy, right? But saying, no, we're gonna do for ourselves, and we're gonna take power, and we're gonna take power into our own hands and determine our own destiny. It just led to a lot of questions. And the more questions I asked, the more I started realizing that our people whether you're Mexican or Puerto Rican or Dominican or Salvadorian or Nicaraguan or or Venezuelan, we have always fought back. Every single time, we've always fought for our freedom, and there's a nexus there. There's a connection there. And so I just needed to say that again. I got a little emotional that hopefully it wasn't too bad, but I have a certain sense of gratitude towards specifically towards the Young Lords, because that's one of the first groups I started learning about. So shout out to M1, who I met, and then he hooked me up with Divine, who's a rapper, and then Divine told me to go to New York because there was an event there about the Young Lords, and that's how I got introduced to the Young Lords. I started reading about the Young Lords, and it literally changed my life. So I thank you.
Thank you.
Puerto Rico, it's the only Spanish-speaking territory in the Western Hemisphere that is still a colony, which is a euphemism, as far as I'm concerned, for slavery. Why independence, and why should people care? And what do you say to those who say, well, Puerto Ricans really don't want to be independent?
Well, every human being, every social entity of human beings, whether it be a tribe, whether it be a family, whether it be a community, have a right to develop, to be self-sufficient, to have the freedom to be creative. Okay? Puerto Ricans also have that right to exist. And of course, you're going to say, some will absorb the propaganda. They would tell us that we couldn't be self-sufficient. Okay, and that's usually the main argument of self-sufficiency, that we would sink in poverty, etc., etc., etc. And then when you throw them the facts, it's like shattering a wall of glass, okay, with the truth. And it becomes unbelievable until you tell them where to go to affirm what you're saying. Puerto Rico is a population of about 4 million people. It is the country where it has 30 billion, you hear me? $30 billion that are extracted every year by US corporations. For a country that is only 4 million people, it is the highest per capita in the world. These are facts. These are not things that Carlito's making up. US corporations, Wall Street, extracts $30 billion every year from Puerto Rico. Now, if Puerto Rico were to become a state tomorrow, it would be poorer, more poor than the poorest state that now exists of the 50th states in the United States. Now, how is that? How is that? Why? It's because of the colonial policy. That's the reason why you have the Jones Act that prevents, that denies Puerto Rico the right to trade with other countries. Okay, and when you have these restrictions, because there's nothing in Puerto Rico that's controlled by Puerto Ricans. Nothing in education, nothing in the commercial life, nothing in the economic life, nor in politics. That's right, nor in politics. They will tell you that that you have the right to vote. No, we don't. because even the election of a door catcher in Puerto Rico is subject to annulment by the U.S. Congress. Even the governor, the elections for the governor of Puerto Rico, it can be annulled by the U.S. Congress. This is written into law. So when you have a plebiscite in Puerto Rico that gives you the so-called options of statehood, commonwealth, the status quo, or independence, don't think that your decisions as a people are going to be respected. No, because that can be annulled by the U.S. Congress. It's written into U.S. federal law that the Congress has the right to annul any election in Puerto Rico. You see, so when they give us this description of the free associated states, that's a fallacy. That's a joke. Okay, because you could call any, a colony, you could put, call it anything, paper holes, whatever you put on it. There's many aspects. There's many aspects of the colonial status of Puerto Rico. And by the way, something they will not tell you and keep you in the blind about. Plebiscites run counter and are against international law. And I welcome all of your viewers to study United Nations Charter 1514, which is it's a law. It's an international law. In order for you to have a legitimate plebiscite in Puerto Rico, you would have to meet 5 prerequisites. That's right, 5 prerequisites. And they are immediate handing over of the powers of government to Puerto Rican hands. 2, immediate withdrawal of all U.S. military bases in Puerto Rico. 3, immediate withdrawal of all repressive agencies, FBI, DEA, CIA, any repressive agency, all of the armed legal agencies of government. The return, I should say, the freedom of political prisoners, because ever since 1898, there has been Puerto Rican political prisoners. Today we have one sister, Ana Belén, who's in prison, and she will be released in 2022. She did a Jones of 20 years. The most recently released Puerto Rican political prisoner was Oscar Lopez Rivera. Okay. But ever since 1898, there has been a steady flow of political prisoners. We've always had political prisoners, even under the Spanish colonialism. Political prisoners is the way of life for Puerto Ricans, I guess. Okay. And last but not least, immediate economic compensation. That is reparations for Puerto Rico. Return all that has been robbed from Puerto Rico. And I would estimate that is in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. So it's not as if Puerto Rico is poor. Question is, who controls the wealth that Puerto Rico produces? Who is it that robs it? Okay, because wealth is based on what people create, and Puerto Ricans have created, for the U.S. a tremendous amount of wealth. They're not in Puerto Rico to hang out. U.S. corporations, U.S. imperialism is not in Puerto Rico to hang out. They are there to plunder. They are there to exploit.
What would you say to those who call Puerto Rican independence fighters today or yesterday, terrorists, or any other type of characterization by the U.S. government? Whether we're talking about, you mentioned the sister who's a political prisoner. You mentioned. Was it Rafael Cancel Miranda? Was it who you mentioned? We can go back
Oscar
in history.
Lopez.
Oscar
Oscar
Lopez. I'm sorry,
Lopez was
Oscar
the most
Lopez.
recently released.
Right. And by the way, he was offered clemency twice. I believe the first time was under Clinton, and he refused because his other comrades were not provided the same clemency. So he actually stood long. He was in the belly of the beast, if you will, much longer.
Yes,
Because he refused clemency the first time.
He did 37 years in prison.
Yeah. So how would you respond to folks who say that these folks are nothing but terrorists?
I would have to ask them to get new lenses. Go see a therapist. Go develop a hobby. It might change your thinking. Why don't you read a book and study history? Okay, because nothing is more terroristic than the U.S. Navy bombing of Vieques for 60 years. That's right. The U.S. Navy was violating U.S. laws, okay? And nobody called them terrorists. They were bombing a civilian populated area, okay? And the only thing that separated the people, the community, from where the bombs were landing was a fence, okay? And that happened for 60 years. And 1 out of every 5 Puerto Rican has cancer on that island. It's called Vieques. They did the same thing in the island of Culebra. Okay? What is more terroristic that for 30 years, the US doctors were secretly sterilizing Puerto Rican women? Okay? Dr. Rose has set up a program in Puerto Rico where women were being secretly sterilized from the 1930s all the way into the 1960s. And one third of the childbearing women's population in Puerto Rico was not able to give birth. Okay? What's more terroristic than that? What's more terroristic than the U.S. military landing in Guanica in 1898? In 1898, and as they were moving northward on the island, they were taking peasants who resisted them, who resisted the abuse and the rape. They tied them to trees to have them shot. You see, so when we talk about, what is terroristic, I'll take it to the legal, because United Nations 1514 United Nations Charter 1514 says that a colonized and occupied people have a right to use whatever means necessary in order to liberate themselves, in order to achieve freedom, including the use of force. And if it's sanctioned by international law, then why are you absorbing the logic of those who perpetuate violence? So what Oscar Lopez, what the FALN, the macheteros, what the patriots of throughout Puerto Rican history have done was not illegal. Needless to say, it was not immoral, because an oppressed people like African Americans, they had a right to escape. They had a right to fight. Slavery. You entered my homeland. You've been raping our sisters. I have a right to head off. It's as simple as that. It's not complicated. We don't need to intellectualize it.
Any final thoughts before we finish?
I never have a final thought. That's going to be hard. Okay? I never have a final thought, not in the liberation struggle. You know, as I told you when we started talking, I'm not a former young lord. I'm still a young lord, and I'll be a young lord to the day I die. I will continue fighting, for my people. I love my people. I love all oppressed people, and and we're gonna be free. All of us, black, brown, yellow, everybody are going to be free. Because the rulers, there will be that moment where they will not be able to rule as they did in the old way. They're having trouble now. look, look what happened. Look what happened January 6th. The chickens came home to roost at the Capitol.
Right.
Okay, that was a symptom of cancer. Okay, this system has a cancer, and what January 6th proved was when they started going against each other, that's a cancer.
We're gonna end here tonight. I'm gonna encourage folks to please share the video, like the video, check us out at anticonquista.com. I personally like to dedicate this episode to my best friend, who was I was raised by my single mom, but I was also raised in a Puerto Rican household by a beautiful single Puerto Rican woman who raised two kids. Her name is Gladys Rodriguez. She's retired in Puerto Rico right now. Her son was my best friend and was like a brother to me. She ended up retiring to Puerto Rico, and he died in my old bedroom at my mother's house because he was staying at my mother's house. I can't, because the family has never chosen to tell the story publicly. I'm going to keep that private. His sister is a professor at the University of Michigan. She's now Dr. Wilda Rodriguez. And so I dedicate this episode to that family, to my best friend who passed away some years ago now in my old bedroom. And Carlito, I thank you. I can't thank you enough for this. And I'm gonna end by saying pa'lante.
Y nunca para atrás.